Welcome to the Report Card, where we evaluate efforts to improve the lives of families, schools, and students. Well, the coronavirus pandemic has forced us to rethink how many of our foundational institutions of society are going to function, and schools are no exception. On this episode of the Report Card, I asked two former superintendents to come on and talk about the considerations current superintendents are wrestling with and the steps policymakers might take to better support them during this tumultuous pandemic. Today, joining me are Josh Starr and Duncan Klussmann. Josh Starr served as the superintendent of Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland for 4 years, and before that, in Stamford, Connecticut. He's a former special education teacher and currently is the CEO of PDK International. And Duncan Klussmann served for over a decade as the superintendent of Spring Branch Independent School District in Texas. Before that, he spent time as a school principal, assistant principal, and classroom teacher. Currently, he's a clinical assistant professor at the University of Houston's College of Education. Josh, Duncan, thanks for coming on the Report Card.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to see you.
Thanks, glad to be here.
So, Duncan, Josh, you guys, overall, you got 25 years or close to it as superintendents. You ever seen anything like this?
No. I have not, and I am, just following my superintendent colleagues on Twitter. I've been texting with various folks that I work with, and they are doing everything they can to not only take care of themselves and their families and their kids and their parents, whatever else, but also take care of their communities and provide good information to people out there as quickly as they can. But it is a huge challenge. The only thing that I can recall even close to this, I was not superintendent during 9/11, but I was working in a district in New Jersey, and we were greatly impacted by it. There was a level of just sort of crisis and just confronting the unknown, but it passed after a little bit, right? But leading during a time like this is no easy job.
No, and Nate, I've never faced anything like this. In my 11 years, I did have to deal with hurricanes, and my greatest disruption was Ike, where we had to close for 10 days, but nothing like this with the uncertainty, just the duration, how to shift whole systems to different models of providing education. Just nothing, this is so unprecedented in modern times. And I will say my heart goes out to everyone that's in all of our educators that's dealing with it, but I am confident that our educators in this country will rise to the occasion and will do great things and help the students really make it through the very difficult time.
Yeah, you said it. Uncertainty is the thing, right? You have a hurricane, even God forbid you have a terrorist attack. It happens and you know when it's over, more or less. Mm-hmm. But we don't even know whether we're at the end of the beginning or just at the front end of this thing, and we're already in with 45 states are closed, and it's hard to know when things will come back online. How much uncertainty do you expect most superintendents have now, or are they working with a lot more information than Joe Public's got?
Well, I imagine they have more certainty than others. I mean, typically what happens in these situations is you're in constant communication with other various agencies, whether in your own local jurisdiction, the health department, police department, mayor's office, whatever, county exec, whatever it may be. And then you're working with the State Department. And then there are, your listservs that go around amongst the superintendents. But the question is, when will school be will school be closed for the rest of the year? You have all those kinds of things. I think the College Board just announced they're putting AP tests online, and I know DeVos just announced that they are, states can waive all standardized tests. So that provides a degree of certainty, but it's constantly moving. And they don't teach you logistics in superintendent school, right? They're taught they teach us to be leaders of teaching and learning and things like that. And they don't teach you logistics. You learn on the job. And this is a logistics issue in many ways and a communication issue. Most school districts don't have the kind of communication arm that something like Montgomery County does, or, they're a lot smaller. And the listservs are populated with people who are posting misinformation. So there's a communications and a logistics issue that you have to deal with, along with the uncertainty. I'm assuming by next week, and I don't know, Duncan, what you think, but I think by next week, particularly the end of next week, we'll know a lot more, decisions will have been made, and things will tend to get a little more routine, if you can even use that word in this kind of time. But it's sort of my assumption.
Yeah, I would agree, Josh. I think, in any crisis situation involving government, there has to be decision making point. Is it a local decision? Is it handled at the local level, at the state level, or the federal level, at the national level? I think that's still trying to kind of working its way through the process of education right now. I know in Texas, our governor's initial approach was to allow it to happen at the local level. We have over 1,000 very independent school districts. I think he saw that that was going to be a struggle, and so he just recently made it a statewide decision as far as schools. By the way, I think that's very helpful to superintendents.
Yep.
When you're in a crisis at this level, it needs to raise to the state level at least in the decision of closure. And then with the U.S. Department today, from deciding where is the national decision making in education, public education, which again is not a federal role, it's a state role. But where do they play into that? And because there are so many federal requirements today, I think the testing decision really has helped out. I have been told by my colleagues that some of the biggest struggle right now is around clarity involving special education students and how to adjust this whole delivery system and create some certainty around how the flexibility that needs to occur for the local decisions to be made, and where the federal government needs to maintain certain statutes in place. And so I think, now that the testing has been defined, I think it'll move into different areas of specialization, like special education. And I do think there will be more certainty. One thing I think we've got to define at some point, what is the outcome we're after with the decisions that we're making as a country. My sense is we're trying to flatten the curve so that our curve never peaks above the capacity of our healthcare system. And I think one thing that would help everyone, schools and the public in general, is we're making a lot of quick steps which are critical, and I'm glad they're being made. I think we need to clearly define the outcome we're trying to achieve by making those steps. And I think that would not only create clarity among the public, but also among our schools.
Yeah, so you brought up a topic, and let's just jump in there. Whether it's equity concerns for special education students, and there you have federal requirements and legal requirements that you provide students with special education equal access to the education that you're going to provide, may not have been considered in the context of within a week's time, we're going to move everything outside of our school buildings. What are the concerns that you got to raise? Because you, at the same time, you have a bunch of kids with special needs, and those needs are going to be incredibly difficult to meet in this remote learning project that we're all participating in. How is it that superintendents have to weigh these things, and how heavily do those regulatory authorities that are in force in normal times, how heavily are they weighing right now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And what I'm hearing from superintendents in implementing all the changes that need to occur to keep education moving, what I'm hearing from them is they're really concerned about equity, whether that's equity of access between students who are in poverty and those who are not, or whether it's access for rural systems versus urban and mid-urban type systems. And then clearly around special education, because as we all know, special education students, one of our 3 kids had that designation and received those services. They have very specialized individual education plans that legally the districts need to follow. I would say, a large majority, if not most, do not have virtual learning defined in the plan. And so as you shift to virtual education, how do you meet the needs of students who have very specific IEPs on how education services are supposed to be provided to them? And so I do think this is one of those very tricky times where flexibility is critical to give the local leaders maximum flexibility to meet the need, but with the understanding that you do have to meet the needs of all students. But I do hear from my colleagues in the field that equity across the board is one of their greatest concerns in making this shift.
Yeah, I'm hearing the same thing. Certainly equity around food, distribution, things like that. But there's a whole bunch of other issues with that. I do think the issue around special education is an interesting test for us. And I mean, this may be sort of an unpopular thing to say, but I think there's sort of a reasonableness test or a common sense test. I'm already hearing these rumors from people, see them, if people in the neighborhood, like on a walk or something like that, or you see a text say, well, we heard this school system completely shut down all learning because special ed kids aren't getting, not able to accommodate. And how can they possibly do that, right? And I think superintendents, on one hand, look, they're checking with the lawyers, they're checking with the state. This is where the state is so incredibly important, and the feds to provide guidance. But unfortunately, in my experience, oftentimes what happens is the fringes will dominate the discourse, and the most parents of special needs kids are very reasonable. They just want services for their kids. They will completely understand if services for their child lags a week behind services for other kids. They get it, right? As long as they get good explanations, good communications, they know who to talk to, etc. But then there are some people in the advocacy community, unfortunately, who make money off of hysteria. And again, and there's some great advocates out there, but there are people in there who it is in their interest to pull out the letter of the law and say, no, you can't do anything unless you do it for everybody. And that is true, and it is necessary to have those kinds of guardrails under normal times. But most parents, I think, will be like, you know what, I get it. As long as my kid, you're going to be doing something for them at some point quickly. I understand that this isn't all perfect, and I'll work with you as long as, again, the superintendent and the school system are communicating. So I would hope that the fringes don't dominate some of these conversations and decisions, because that could be at the expense of a whole bunch of other kids. But that's the kind of thing that superintendents have to deal with. What is the state saying? What are my lawyers saying? What does the law say? What will my community tolerate? What are they saying on Facebook and the listservs? What is the media trying to make a big deal out of this? And can I be seen as a credible leader who can help our entire community through all of this work?
I think Josh makes a great point in so many of those areas. This is where it really helps in crisis to have clarity established by those at a state leadership and a national leadership level.
So, Josh, you brought up this is often dominated by the periphery and the edges. Let's talk about the meat of the plate. Seems like we have a lot of districts turning pretty quickly on a dime from standard procedures to online provisions, sort of education through packets, all kinds of things. What have you seen, and how do you think we're doing?
So I will tell you, I don't know what we know right now. I know what I see in the Twitterverse. I know what I see people saying they're doing. But I know a lot of people are doing great things. I'm not suggesting they're not. But we don't really know the extent to which districts have really set true online learning, or if they're just simply pushing out packets of materials. And I'm not judging one or the other, but I think there's a lot of activity going on right now. And I don't know that anybody has a good handle on the substance of what folks are doing. I do think, I don't know if you ever read that book about Roosevelt's first 100 days, and his thing was you just got to do stuff, right? It doesn't matter. Do something. If it doesn't work, do something. And I think there's a lot of legitimacy to that kind of leadership, that if you spend too much time planning, even if that plan is great, you're going to lose people by not doing something. So I do think that there's this rush to get something moving, get everybody involved, have them do things. But we don't really know the substance of it. We don't know the effectiveness of it. And like anything in public education, there's going to be a huge range based on capacity. I was talking, we're concerned about our Educators Rising Conference and the competitions, and we may have to do them virtually for our kids. We have people in rural areas, they do not have broadband. They don't have access. So now they're not going to be able to compete. So those are real issues. So there's a huge range, and I think that we don't really know the substance of what folks are doing out there as they're just trying to figure this all out in real time.
I am pretty amazed at how quickly systems have moved. Again, I think there's some concern around equity of access, and particularly in rural areas and for students who are from low-income homes. But I'm pretty amazed at the shift and the speed of that shift. And I'm amazed because, essentially I feel like we really, for the last 10 plus years, have been behind in the whole aspect of virtual education as systems. We've slowly kind of tinkered with it and worked with it, some aspects of distance learning, but we really haven't shifted. And we've often done it around individuals, people's willingness to do it, versus, who's interested in doing it versus everyone. So I'm pretty interested in watching this shift, and I think I'm pretty amazed at the speed that it has occurred. I think there's kind of three things I think that have to be in place. You have to have the system, the software, something to actually, be able to make this shift. You have to have the participation of staff and teachers. And remember, in the past, really for the last 10 plus years, we've let it be around participation. If you want to use Blackboard, you can use it. If you want to use some platform, you can use it. And then you have to have access and broad access for the students to do it. So I'm really pretty amazed and very, very pleased with the shift that's occurring. And I do think, all generations seem to deal with a defining moment, and maybe for education, this very difficult time is going to be a defining moment to really move us thinking of some of the issues we've talked about in the past, whether it's an agrarian calendar or whether it's virtual education versus face-to-face. I think one of the possible outcomes of a very difficult situation is maybe accelerating us to the areas that we've struggled to go in education last year.
And if I can just add one piece, I think I will say that the one thing we have seen is around food mobilization. That just seems like the most immediate issue that we know kids have. Systems have done just an outstanding job with that from what I've seen.
Give folks a sense of that. So when you're a SUP, you have a lot of things to care about. You're an instructional leader and so forth, but you're also a big food distribution network in your community. What does it take to move from a cafeteria-based system to a to-go meal provider?
Well, a lot of systems started doing summer food distribution a number of years ago. I know we started in Montgomery County. I'm trying to think, maybe it was like 2012, give or take. And so I do think some of what food nutrition service managers understand logistics really well. And it's simply a matter of ramping it up. You have to get agreements from community centers, and you have to find places to do the distribution. It's just an acceleration of what many, many school systems have been doing during the summer for many years. And again, it's where you can put it, how you make sure you keep everything clean and all that kind of stuff, make sure people have gloves. This is where, protective gear is so important. And if there aren't enough masks, whatever it may be, but there are ways of doing it. And just from what I've seen nationally, it seems like that's where folks have ramped up immediately. And part of that, and Duncan, I'm curious if you agree, like there's this cry from a lot of parents about academics, but I think a lot of superintendents know you got to take care of kids first and families. It's Maslow, right? And you just got to do that first. And then the other stuff, we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. But you got to take care of our vulnerable kids and families first. And they seem to be stepping up really well around that.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing is that I think for the superintendents, the feeding side may be one of the most certain sides, because I think they also feel like if they ramp this up, and again, in our hurricane situations, this is something we had to do not only for our students, but for our community. So we started serving first responders, we started serving community. I remember opening up our gym and saying, let's just start making hot dogs. We had hot dogs and popcorn that was there ready for games. It's like, let's just start making hot dogs. And the question at the time is, will we get reimbursed? And so let's just take care of people. We'll worry about that later. I think through those experiences, the folks in Texas, particularly on the coastline, know it's one of the things you can ramp up fairly quickly with certainty to be able to really get going and know that you're going to be reimbursed for those costs when at the end of the day.
So that raises a really good question. How much money is going out the door for new programs that wasn't planned on? It's got to be substantial, right?
Yeah, I actually sit on a board, and we approved a $2 million window yesterday, a budget amendment to adjust spending for the organization. So, luckily, most districts will have their fund balances, but this is one where you immediately will have to go into areas of your reserves without the certainty that those will be reimbursed by state or local officials. And so clearly there's going to be some costs associated very quickly up front to be able to make this shift to a more virtual environment.
Yeah, and I would so I think that there's a lot of unknowns. What will the feds do around title dollars, right? Will they be able to be rolled over? Just like Duncan said, reserves. If the state has a requirement for to have a reserve, can you dip into it? I think the bigger issue, frankly, is going to be this year how are states going to adjust their budgets based on the complete economic collapse we're going to experience, and then there's going to be the planning. I mean, I'm assuming that we're going to go through another 3 to 5 year down period in school systems because of the lack of tax revenues coming in, and that's what I think folks are now starting to realize. Holy crap! We're going to have a much smaller footprint. And I'm assuming states and the feds are going to take care of relaxing some of the rules around federal dollars and whatever it may be. But I don't know what states are going to do around the state aid that they give to school districts. And then how will districts who may have thought they were getting X amount for the fiscal year 21, all of a sudden they're getting X minus a whole bunch amount, and they've got to completely readjust. Then it becomes a whole HR issue. There's just a domino effect that's going to happen that is going to consume superintendents and central office leaders, unions as well, for a number of months dealing with all this.
And I think in the case of education right now, what's really important is that the federal government, the U.S. Department of Education, really move out of the way of states by giving maximum flexibility, allowing those state leaders, the governors and the commissioners and state superintendents to really be able to address this at the state level, and then able to provide the guidance they need to the local level. Clarity in roles and responsibilities in a case like this is critical. Yeah. And I think by giving it directly to the governors and the superintendents and the commissioners and the federal government really giving that flexibility, create a lot more clarity for the local schools. And if you think about it, the systems are set up to bring kids to school and to maintain school size. So a large percent of your employees in the system, their roles are not there to set up virtual education. So you think about your bus drivers, luckily in this case, cafeteria workers obviously will be brought in to do the work that they do, and maybe bus drivers will start helping out with that. And you have custodians. Obviously, you'll maintain your buildings, but you don't need to maintain them the same way you do when you have 1,000 or 2,000, 3,000 kids in them. So you have a system that's completely set up. Remember, 80% of the cost in school systems is in personnel that are set up for a large. In Spring Branch, we had for our 35,000 kids, we had about 4,500 employees. A little under half are non-teaching roles. They're there to support the system. Custodians, bus drivers, maintenance, just the whole array that occurs in running a system. And so there will be some shifting roles that occur, I think, too, in this very short term until we figure out what's going on.
Duncan, I'm curious, as you're a superintendent and you have a bunch of employees wondering, am I going to have a job? Am I going to get paid during this time when the school is going to shut down? What kind of options do you have to give them certainty, or is it out of your hands?
Yeah, this is critical because in most communities, the school systems are one of the largest employers, if not the largest employer. I don't know how it's addressed in all states, but I know in Texas, Board of Trustees can take action to do a resolution that basically says this is not a gift of public funds and that they are going to compensate employees, including hourly employees, during a crisis like this. So I think most boards in Texas, if they have not already taken that action, will be taking that action. I know in Texas, the governor has loosened the open meetings laws so that virtual meetings, we've had on the books you can do virtual meetings, but they were pretty constrained. So he's taken some of those constraints to make that easier. And I think you'll see in Texas that boards will be taking that action and creating that certainty among their employees, again, in many communities where the education institution is the largest employer.
When I think about it from an economic point of view, superintendent wants to get everything back to normal as soon as possible.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. I mean, you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, because of the unknowns, and two, the complete lack of leadership at the federal level, and really because we don't have the testing, whatever else that we're going to need to really make a decision. Like, someone's going to have to make a decision, say all clear, go back in, and you can't do that without tests, right? And then the other piece is I think there's going to be psychological, kind of aspect to this, because we're sort of towards the end of the year anyway. You can say, you know what, it might be safer to just stay closed for the rest of the year. And it's going to have it has an enormous impact on every aspect of a community's life, without a doubt.
Okay, Josh, let's say that that's how it's going to play out. And on the one hand, I think that governors should wait and see as long as possible before they shut down schools for the rest of the year. But let's just assume that a lot of schools are going to go through the end of the year. Man, that seems like a lot of headaches. You got a bunch of kids who missed their last quarter of school. A lot of them need to graduate, and there's complications there. Even putting the testing aside, if this goes to next fall, what's your number one priority as superintendent to get the kids who need to leave this school year signed off and on to their next episode? And what's your number one priority as kids are returning to class in the fall?
I think the number one priority needs to be based around resetting complete expectations. So what it looks like to end a year this year will be unlike what it's like to end a school year any other year in history. And I think you just have to have that understanding and that expectation and put it in perspective. If I have a student who has been in a system for 13, 14 years, and in March, middle of March, with 2.5 months to go before they graduate, I think we can feel confident that they are able to graduate and to receive their diploma with whatever type of system is put in for the next 2.5 months as we finish out. Because really that graduation is an example of a totality. And so I think keeping that perspective is really important. I think it really does have to be a concern about, if our goal is nationally to flatten this curve out, to not reach the capacity of our healthcare system. And again, I think that's a question. Is that the goal? Then what does it look like moving into the fall? This is a virus. And so what does it look like where viruses spread and necessarily don't go away? And understanding that I keep hearing the quickest we'll have a vaccine is 18 months. We do know if we have the right tools, a vaccine, whatever needs to be in place, we can ramp up really quickly to take care of that. We just have to have those things in place. I remember being in elementary school in the 60s, and they lined us all up. I don't even know what immunization it was. It may have been smallpox at the time. They lined us all up in the cafeteria with folks standing there with some gun they had, where they basically you just walked up and they shot it in your arm and gave you your shot, and you went back to class. So I think with the right tools, we can be prepared for the fall. But with what I'm hearing, 5 months may not be the type of runway that we need.
Yeah, and I would just add, so I do think I agree with Duncan completely about the academic piece, particularly with graduating seniors. I myself have a senior, who's graduating in a couple months. I have a junior starting to think about, college, like junior year is such a big deal. And then I have a sixth grader. I think we're going to be able to figure out the academic piece. I do think that there's going to be this question of what does return look like and what kind of safety precautions you put into play. It's interesting. We actually have surveyed our Educators Rising kids. These are high school kids who want to be teachers. And one of the things they said in the survey, I really need to get good with technology for online learning. I need to make sure I have a lot of good plans, but I need to really make sure I have health and wellness taken care of and that we have cleaning supplies and all that. So I think superintendents are going to have to make sure that they have convinced their communities that there are protocols in place to deal with the unknown, assuming there will be testing, but no virus at that point. And I don't mean academic testing, I mean coronavirus testing. It's really about ensuring that there are procedures in place so that school leaders and teachers can react quickly, make sure kids are safe, et cetera. That's going to be what is of absolute critical importance when we do reconvene.
We've got districts across the nation, probably all states are going to shut down before too long. I think we're at 45 now. And this is a major disruption to learning. Well, the end of the school year is a real fixed point most of the time. But if there was ever a case where it might be reasonable to extend school years in a lot of districts, this might be it. How likely do you think that is? If we have a more difficult time educating kids in a remote manner, do we run it into mid-July?
Well, it's interesting. Just like we have seen a reshaping of delivery and instruction, I think everything needs to be on the table on how this would be handled. I think one thing that needs to be on the table is opposed to extending the year. Do you call it a year, and then do you change the way you educate kids around a calendar, where you shift out of an agrarian calendar to more of a year-round calendar? It's been such a disruption. Is it an opportunity in that disruption to actually completely shift the calendar? Things so many of us have talked about for so many years is misalignment of a system to the world today. And so, I think one consideration has to be, do you just say we're going to call it a year, and then we're going to start with a new approach, not only with the ability to do a much greater, degree of virtual learning, but also do you look at the way you calendar the year for schools?
I think of the sort of practicalities of it and the money. 2/3 of teachers have a second job. Many of that's in the summer. They rely on that for their income. Now, who knows whether they're going to be able to work this summer anyway, but if you got to pay people if they're going to work beyond the contractual year. So where is that money going to come from? There's also a logistics issue. I mean, we see it all the time with schools that don't have air conditioning. There's just a lot of resource issues that go along with extending the school year. I mean, and someone has to pay for it. So if the state were to say, yes, we will cover the cost of all that, I mean, salaries, keeping the schools open, et cetera, then I think that's a really legitimate concept. Of course, summer camps would be losing out, and that's a whole nother issue in communities because there are people who were employed there that, they need that money during the summer. So unless the resources are there, I don't see how it's gonna happen.
Duncan, Josh, this podcast is huge. We've got millions and millions of listeners. So you're really speaking to the people now. And when you have this opportunity, how can the public support superintendents who are trying to do their best to get these school systems back up and running? I mean, what do superintendents want from the public right now?
Well, I would say this. First, kids are always learning, regardless of what we're teaching them. Right now, they are learning how adults respond to a crisis and the unknown. And what adults need to understand is that they need to be holding their kids close, right? And helping them through the emotional adjustments that they need to make around all this and just deal, right, with that aspect of it. While we also start, when we go back to fractions and world history and all that, I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is don't believe Facebook, don't believe the listservs. If you didn't see it on the district website or from an official email, don't assume it's true, right? And that is one of the most frustrating parts of being a superintendent in general in the age of social media. I love my Twitter, but don't believe everything you see on Twitter, right? If it's not officially from the superintendent, then assume that it's just rumor.
I would say too, just really have the perspective that superintendents really have their child's best interest in mind as they move forward and make these decisions in a very difficult time with all the uncertainty. And the other piece is, I do think it's a time, again, when we talk about, a generational definition, something that defines a generation, I think it's actually an opportunity to strengthen families. As I you go out to take the dog for a walk or ride a bike, it's amazing to see families who are just out and about right now that I have not seen really the last 10, 15, 20 plus years. And so I think it is an opportunity to strengthen families, and just for the families to know that the superintendents and the teachers and everyone in education who's trying to figure this out right now in a very uncertain time have their students' best interest in mind in the decision that they're making. And I hear that in every voice I talk to.
Yeah, bottom line, Nat, is just please give superintendents the benefit of the doubt. Just please assume positive suppositions and give them the benefit of the doubt. And exactly like Duncan said, they want the best for everybody, and they're doing everything they can in these uncertain times. So please just give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and if that counts now, I'm sure it's going to count in 4 more weeks when a bunch of parents are real tired of this break. Well, Duncan, Josh, appreciate you coming on the report card and sharing your perspective with us. Hopefully this won't last too much longer.
Thanks so much for having us, Nat. Great seeing you.
Thanks for listening to the report card with Nat Malkus. And special thanks to our guests, Josh Starr and Duncan Klussmann. Thanks also to our producers. They make these podcasts possible. That includes Matt Rice, Tyler Hoover, and Gage Hurley of Liquid Media. Remember to subscribe to the report card on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And while you're there, leave us a review so that other people can find the show. As always, give us comments, questions, or topic suggestions at ed.podcast@ai.org. Signing off for this show, I'm Nat Malkus.